I really sort of enjoy the opportunity to sort of meet with all of you and talk about mobile health and the applications of digital technologies to health research, and particularly in the behavioral and social sciences. So I'm excited about what you're doing, happy that OBSSR supports it, and hopefully all of you will, at the end of the day, do amazing things that will help sort of transform how we do behavioral and social science, particularly with the application of technology to that. So that's actually where I want to start. That what you're doing and what we're all doing is not only changing the way we assess behavior in health and how we modify behavior in health. I really think we're actually, the technologies we have in front of us are now also transforming how we actually do science. This is sort of, I've done this presentation a few times, so if some of you have heard this particular part of it, I apologize, but I'm actually, a lot of times I do presentations on something and I go, yeah, that was okay, and then I toss it. This is one I think I've actually grown more enamored with as I go along. So, but the concept here is pretty straightforward, which is that all of our research methods have been evolved from a data poor environment. And by that I mean, and many of you know what this data poor environment looks like, right? Our priority ends up being on prospective design and data collection. We have very limited data collection opportunities as a result because we have to work so hard. We've got to recruit these participants. We've got to assess them. We've got to get all the data that we need to get from them. And so as a result, we do basically hypothesis-driven research, which is absolutely fine. I'm not saying we shouldn't do hypothesis-driven research, but we have a question first. Then we go about collecting the data to answer that question. We answer the question. And often after that, we just toss the data away and we're done. We don't do anything more with it as a result. It's a fairly inefficient way to do research. The result is we end up with predominantly cross-sectional, minimally longitudinal designs in most of the studies that we do. We're unable to assess and control for all the myriad confounds in this complex dynamical system that we're trying to assess. And so we mostly just relegate all of those confounds via randomization to error. And which is sort of the result of us being focused primarily on RCTs as the primary way that we've done this research, at least in the intervention phase, and manipulate independent variables as we move forward. So I want to stop for a second and think about what data-rich research environments look like and what the research methods in them look like. And there are a few of them to sort of look at, right? Meteorology is a data-rich environment. Plate tectonics is a data-rich environment. The Hadron Super Collider and subatomic physics is a data-rich environment. And cosmology is also a data-rich environment. So if you think about this, what do these sciences have in common? They, one, have built an infrastructure that allows them to collect data in a temporally dense manner. So data is not collected once or twice or three times over the course of the year. You know, we talk about longitudinal cohort studies, and I'll even talk about some of them when we talk about precision medicine initiative in a minute. But we talk about them as longitudinal studies, and their assessments are once a year. That's not anywhere near the type of temporal density of a data-rich science. Meteorology is collecting it by the minute and the second. Plate tectonics is doing the same thing. All of these are collecting data in a very temporally dense way, and they've built the infrastructure to collect data in an exploratory fashion, to focus on explanation and prediction, and to be very computational in the analytics that they go about using. So that's the focus, I think, of a data-rich environment. So I just want to, as a way of example, think about meteorology for a second and sort of how they evolved. They started just like we did with very local limited measurement. You measure in one place, you measure at one time, and that's pretty much it. And it was a result of all the Farmer's Almanac. I'll predict the future next year based on this same location the previous year. But then they did a few things. They leveraged communication technologies. In the case of meteorology, it was telegraph. For us, it actually is much more advanced sort of communication technologies that we have available to us to be able to connect data across sites and across time, to be able to put that data together. They set standards for data integration, which I think is, as we talk about mobile health and that sort of area, is an area that we really need to focus on, is greater data integration and data standards around the types of data that we collect and how we collect it. Even in our sensor technology data, those of you who work in the sensor space know that all of that sensor data is coming at us in different segments and different forms with different algorithms that are driving it. And the lack of standards prevents us from doing the data integration that we need to do. Continue leveraging the technical advances in measurement, communication, and computation. I always like to tell a story in meteorology about the fact that we actually had the computational models in place long before we had the computer capacity to be able to actually predict the weather. Because what would happen is by the time you did all the computations in the old-fashioned way manually, whatever date of weather you were trying to predict had already passed. People, they just couldn't compute fast enough to get to the point where they could have any predictive power. So the result ends up being a rich integrated data that's computationally modeled to explain and predict phenomena. And that's where I think we need to be going with health research in general and also behavioral research more generally. So there's a few things, obviously, and these are all the things that all of you are studying and working on this week. The dawn of a data-rich sort of behavioral science particularly. We've got both ecological momentary assessment methods that allow us to do all the work that we need to do on prospective self-assessment and do that via random prompting or event-based prompting to be able to pull data in a much more intensive way than we have in the past, even via self-report. We have all the data from the digital footprints and traces that people drop throughout social media, call data records, consumer sensors, all of that sort of work. I'll remind you that when the Ebola outbreak occurred, there was a considerable amount of work, and it never really came to fruition, but where they wanted to use the call data records to track where people had been. I mean, keep in mind what we do with surveillance epidemiology around an infectious outbreak. Person comes in, we determine that they've had an outbreak, and then we ask them, where have you been in the last month, right? And how many people have you seen, and who were those people, and when did you talk to them? And, right, that's how we determine sort of connection. The call data records actually automate all of that for us. We can see everywhere they've been. If we triangulate them with all the other call data records, we can see who they've been close to or with. So all that becomes much more automated if we can pull off those kinds of data. And then we have, of course, all the sensor data that will passively and continuously monitor a variety of health risk behaviors in context. And then all the computational modeling approaches that allow us to handle some of that temporally dense data. So I think we're actually at the point of actually transforming behavioral sciences, behavioral and social sciences, particularly around some of the technologies that all of you are working on. Just a reminder about the fact that when we're looking at these things, we're looking at levels of influence at all levels. Our tendency, especially in the sensor space, has been the focus on behavior, focus on the sort of the line along the middle where it says human action and behavior, because it's something that we can relatively easily assess and monitor with sensor technologies. The same thing as one level down with physiologic data. But where I see some of the real work happening is actually at these higher levels where we're actually sensing context better than we've been able to before. And all of those contexts, groups, families, social networks, large area dynamics, geopolitical and economic, environmental dynamics, all influence health, all influence behavior in certain ways. And being able to sense those and assess them using technology, I think, will be an important component. So in our computational modeling, we've done lots of these things, right? So this is the social network analysis form of computational modeling to assess sort of the relationships among people. This has also been done with great success, actually, with the connectome in the brain and using social network analysis and graph theory to better understand the connections of neurons in the brain using the same basic methodology for that as understanding sort of social connections and social networks. Agent-based modeling, obviously, to do things like the modeling of tobacco taxes and other sorts of policy-based interventions and what happens if we can increase or decrease taxes on smoking and what the impact is on those kinds of things. And so the nice thing about this is we can actually simulate from existing data and do, again, for future prospective, predictive, and potentially preemptive work with agent-based modeling on some of those. And then we can also use control system or dynamic or computational dynamic modeling to be able to understand the influence of all of these factors over time as they move throughout the system. so that we're not having to isolate and manipulate one variable, but actually understand and evaluate all those variables in synchrony and together and assess how they sequentially influence each other in a system. And I think that's kind of where the field is beginning to go. And that leads us to, and I borrowed from Santosh Kumar on this slide because I thought it was so cool, a sort of more preventive maintenance sort of approach where just in the same way that meteorology is trying to predict what's going on and what the next thing is that happened and be able to prepare for that in advance, be able to do things about it, or in rerouting traffic and those kind of things, that we can use that same data collection to not only predict what's going to happen in a person's life moving forward, but also eventually be able to preempt it as well and be able to do something about it. So with that as a overview, and one of the things I wanted, just because it's been what I've been living and breathing and why I can't be with you in person, I've been working on the Precision Medicine Initiative for the last, longer than before the president announced it in January of last year. So what is that? Almost 2 years that I've been working on this, I think. And I've been the acting deputy director of the Precision Medicine Initiative for that time. And like Vivek said, I'm eventually handing this off. Eric Dishman from Intel is now the new director of the Precision Medicine Initiative, which has been great to have. And when someone asked me to be the acting deputy director, they didn't tell me that when the new director came, I still needed to be the deputy director until a deputy director was hired. So I'm still on until that happens, but that's not going to be too much longer, or at least hopefully not. So most of you know this is probably the first time in recent that in the State of the Union, both sides of the aisle actually stood up and clapped, was when the president announced the Precision Medicine Initiative back in January of 2015. He followed it up later in late January with sort of the call for a precision medicine effort. And I will tell you that even though what you often hear about precision medicine really is about genes and drugs and disease, it is a much broader sort of initiative that includes all the sort of social and behavioral determinants of health included in it as well. And even when the president talks about it from that perspective as well. It's just that, and I will tell you that this is one of the hard things about selling this, is that it's a lot easier to find a story of someone with a rare genetic disease who they found the genetic variant of and were able to manipulate, and now this person's so much better than they were before. It's hard to have a social and behavioral determinant story like that that has quite that weight. So it still tends to kind of lean publicly toward the genetic end of the spectrum. But it's certainly, I think, in my perspective, a fairly broad effort. But at the same time that the president did that, Francis and Harold Varmus, who was the NCI director at the time, wrote this piece, which if you just want a quick overview of the Precision Medicine Initiative, both the cancer side of it as well as the cohort side of it, this is a good place to sort of look for that detail. And the bottom line in all of this, and this is, again, my behavioral and social science pitch, their language was to encourage support the next generation of scientists, which is you, to develop creative approaches for detecting, measuring, and analyzing a wide range of biomedical information, including molecular, genomic, cellular, clinical, behavioral, physiological, and environmental parameters. And we're using environmental in the broad sense to include social factors as well in that. And so the behavioral and environmental measurement tools that we have allow us to do a lot of things within the precision medicine initiative. We can better characterize the disease processes and treatment outcomes. We can assess not only disease states, but also the physical, mental, and social functional status of people, right? So the fact that someone has a diagnosis tells us actually very little relative to what its impact is on their daily lives. Be able to monitor behavioral and environmental exposures that contribute to disease and that interact with genetic influences, and then potentially provide behavioral and environmental predictors of treatment response beyond that just obtained from genetics. So there's a number of things that I think we can do from that perspective. So there's a near-term effort that I won't talk about because there's another group that's working on this, which is obviously NCI was further along and cancer was further along in pharmacogenomics and being able to identify genetic variants of cancer cells and be able to attack them in a more precise way. So some of the research dollars are going to that, but a larger percentage of it is going to this LASHTO cohort effort of over 1 million volunteers to generate knowledge on precision medicine. The other thing that I wanted to point out here is that I'm at least hoping, and I think many in the NIH are hoping, that having this behemoth effort that the president's behind actually allows us to move some barriers that have been in the way of doing more efficient research generally. Whether it's updating federal rules on how we protect research participants and not being quite so paternalistic about how we do that, and allowing them to think of it more as donating data than necessarily sort of being part of a research study. Advances in FDA oversight for precision medicine products, open electronic health records for research. And I'll tell you that we've been working with the ONC, the Office of National Coordinator for Health IT, around getting to the point where we can access electronic health records via APIs from the vendors much more efficiently and be able to just draw that data down very quickly for research purposes. So there's actually a pilot going on right now at Harvard Center for Biomedical Research, or Biomedical Informatics, excuse me, on being able to do exactly that sort of thing for the Precision Medicine Initiative and then more broadly. So the basics are, as a national cohort of million-plus U.S. volunteers, some of them will get from health provider organizations. The really fun part, because we haven't done this before in a large cohort effort like this, is the president said anybody should be able to raise their hand and become a Precision Medicine Initiative volunteer or participant. So this is not a representative sample where we selected people and then call them. This is a representative sample where you can just go online and say, I want to participate, and you're in and you're started. And then we have to then subsequently figure out how are we going to get your blood draw and your clinical exam and your electronic health record and all the other things that are a little bit easier from the health provider organizations than from direct volunteers, but we're figuring that out. So the other thing that's really kind of exciting about this work is that participants are really quite centrally involved in the effort from the start. They provide regular feedback, or will provide regular feedback, have already in the pilot trials, because we haven't started the main project yet, around sort of the types of data that are being collected, how it's being done, the types of design, how to sort of improve the understanding of the consent form, et cetera, et cetera. So all those things participants involved in throughout the effort. And so focusing on a new model with engaged participants and open, responsible data sharing with all the appropriate privacy protections. So ultimately, we end up with a platform or base for researchers. They can draw from the existing data that's there, but they can also add on and layer, so that if you have a research idea that ultimately comes in that you decide is something that you need in a subpopulation of participants, you can select what those participants are. You can add additional sort of studies to them and add that to the overall database as it moves forward. I will bore you to death if I go through all the administrative structure, especially since I know it's 8:30 in the morning there. So I'll just hit a couple of highlights here. We have the pinks, or the volunteer, the pilot efforts that we have going on right now. There's one that's looking at how do we engage direct volunteers, because they're coming from all over the country. So how do we get them? How do we keep them? How do we keep them engaged in the project? A lot of that is really human-computer interface efforts, right? Because most of our connection will be web-based, whether it's web over the desktop or web as in mobile web applications. One of those ways in which we're regularly engaging participants. So as a result, there's a lot of human-computer interface and UX, UI testing that's going on as part of that effort. We want to make sure we reached a very diverse group. So there were test sites for federally qualified health centers. So that's what FQHCs mean. So sort of the community health centers that are out there that are serving sort of the more underserved or under-resourced populations and being able to attract them better. And then, of course, a communications and public relations effort to be able to get a little bit better idea of how we brand this and how we promote it, how we get it out. Hopefully sometime in the last year. I will tell you that part of why everybody screams about working on the Precision Medicine Initiative is because the president has been very clear that he wants this launched by the end of the year, right before he leaves office. That's not a lot of time. So we've been working nights, days, and weekends to kind of get this off the ground the way it needs to be and also do it right. The core things that were just awarded in July, so that's the other thing to think about, right? We've been about a month since the people have had an award, and yet sometime between now and December, we need to get this off the ground. And there's three components to that: an administrative core, a data core who will manage all the data coming in from all the various sources, and a research support core, which will be the interface for researchers like you coming into it subsequently to access the data and use it. And then health provider organizations, a biobank, and a participant technology center, which has particularly been focused on engaging the technologies that are available to us and making this so that it's not your mother and father's cohort, but actually something a little more 21st century in terms of the use of technology in this cohort. Been really excited. So Scripps and the Vibrant Technologies have been the participant technologies group working on this, along with Sage Bio Networks and some other groups as part of the Participant Technology Center. So that's been a nice sort of piece of this as well. So quickly, just to give you a sense of some of the things that we're looking at, participant-provided information is one key sort of data source for us with all the types of survey-type data that's coming in, but also because we can doing performance-based data as well. So things like some of you have seen the sort of tapping procedure for assessing movement disorder on the iPhone, performance-based measures that are cognitive-based measures like the NIH toolbox, those types of things as well. So we've sort of grouped everything that's sort of data that we extract directly from the provider is coming from that group. There's also an electronic record component to this where we're trying to pull all the data that we can from electronic health records of participants moving forward, both structured data and eventually also unstructured data as well, and being able to put that together. And like I said, there's a Sync for Science effort going on right now at the Harvard Center for Bioinformatics to be able to help us address some of the issues of particularly having direct volunteers come in, identify where their electronic health record resides, being able to, in an automated way, authenticate that they want to have that data donated to the Precision Medicine Initiative, and then have that data transmitted directly. So we speed up that process as we move forward. There is a physical evaluation that will be done as part of all of this. Very simple and very basic: blood pressure, BMI, heart rate, et cetera, et cetera. I won't bore you with details, and all these slides are available to you guys later so you can look at them more in depth as we go. We'll obviously draw blood, and the critical thing here is we obviously want to get significant amounts of genomic types of data as well as proteomic type of data moving on forward beyond that, as well as just simple lab-based data. So there's a lot of things that we want to do. So there's a number of one blood draw, but a number of tubes that we'll be collecting. Be able to collect the data that's necessary for that. And then finally, physical and social environment. So those of you who know the GIS databases and linkages to those, we're working really hard to make sure we get all the location data right. And that includes not only just where you work and where you live, but also in a subgroup of people being able to get smartphone GPS detailed location data so that we can eventually do a better job of assessing that and linking it to all the GIS databases around pollution, neighborhood characteristics such as poverty and those types of things that are important for us to look at. And then again, all the sensor-based devices and various things that will be used. Those will also probably be rolled out in stages and rolled out to subgroups of participants based on need and particular sorts of research questions as they move forward. And then, I got to do this. Oh my God, watch my time. So the concept is not entirely new, right? I mean, we've been doing precision medicine for many years. If you wear glasses like I do, you know that that's the case. And if you've gotten a blood transfusion, you hopefully didn't get A when you really are an AB negative. All of those are precision medicine initiatives. We've also done this in the behavioral sciences as well. Some of you, this was back in the 90s, we did Project Match, where we tried to take interventions for alcohol abuse, two different kinds, and did a match versus non-match sort of factorial design of that. That turned out not to be particularly positive in terms of findings. It turned out that people got better in either condition relative whether they were matched or not. But we've had better success with internet-tailored interventions, and especially around expert systems for web-based interventions. So there's fairly good support for that. But we're obviously trying to move as a mobile technology space beyond treatment A is better than treatment B, right? So we want to know for whom, and that's the tailored and personalized and precision-based models that we're talking about. But for us, it goes beyond that, right? It goes into what context and at what time we deliver those, and that's the just-in-time adaptive intervention work or ecological momentary intervention work, and in what combination and sequence those interventions should be delivered. And that's some of the most smart designs that I know you guys will be talking about this week if you haven't already. So we have the ability to be able to do this in behavioral medicine and in health behavior, but we just need to identify more robust moderators or mediators, more reliable intensive longitudinal data, and better conceptual models to guide us in that work. So this is just a quick commentary I wrote a little while back because I was concerned that people were, boy, that's really blurry. Sorry about that. That there's more than genes and drugs and disease for the Precision Medicine Initiative and all the ways in which behavioral and social sciences could be part of this effort. And just to kind of give you a sense that this has definitely changed, and I'll do this quickly. This was Dr. Collins' vision from 2004 that we have a U.S. prospective cohort that would study genes in the environment. This is actually a really good article in Nature. It was just before its time. And he loves for us to say that it was before his time. It was premature. But anyway, he's glad that it's finally come into fruition, I think. But there are a lot of reasons why we didn't do it in 2004, and this kind of goes to the heart of what all of you are working on. So the cost per genome back in 2004 was about 10 mil to do for the whole genome sequence. EHR adoption was only in about 13% of non-federal acute care hospitals at the time, where now it's well over 95% adoption rates at this stage of the game. Most of our self-report was the old-fashioned self-report, not using things like IRT, like that you would find in PROMIS, item response theory, and modern psychometric work, nor any of the sort of web-based delivery systems or administration systems we now have. 2004 is when the actograph came online. It was the first research-grade sensor that I'm at least aware of in measuring behavior of some sort. So a lot that have come on along the way. And if you were really cool in 2004, this was your phone. It was a Motorola Razr. It flipped, and it didn't do much else other than flip open and allow you to make phone calls. But everybody thought that was cool. And the number of apps in 2004 that you could download from the App Store was absolutely zero because the iPhone wasn't released until 2007 and then the Android until 2009. So obviously our technologies have changed greatly to be able to do things that back in 2004, when Francis originally envisioned this, weren't possible at the time. I'm watching time. So why mobile technologies? And I'm going to do this relatively quickly because this is a place where I think all of you sort of know and understand pretty well. Obviously, with mobile technologies, we can better characterize the phenotypes and outcomes in a large study like this, right? So we can collect more intensive data about heart rate, ECGs, all of that sort of data, and get a more intensive and temporally dense understanding of the phenotypes and the health outcomes of interest to us, particularly sort of between visits and that sort of thing. We can better characterize the treatments. As you know, on average, about 50% of people who are prescribed a medication actually take it, and being able to use our technology to better track how well they've adhered to the treatments is going to be very critical in understanding which treatments work for which people. And though that we're predicting which treatments work and not sort of predicting who's more compliant versus not, or more adherent to a treatment versus not. We can obviously use these mobile technologies to assess treatment predictors beyond genetics alone, and I particularly think we should be interested in variability. I just use heart rate variability as an example here, but lots of places where variability is going to be important, and the temporally dense data that we collect allows us to look at variability and patterns and use that as a predictor of outcome as we move forward. And then, of course, intensively measure the behavioral and environmental risk factors that are important to all of us. But one thing that has really been exciting, I think, for all of the NIH has been that we've been able to use the mobile technologies as a way to fully engage participants as partners in the effort, so that as they provide data to us, we provide feedback back to them, and we give it back to them in a way that's understandable, and we compare it to the overall cohort or to the people in their neighborhood or the people in their state, et cetera, et cetera. So there are ways for us to be able to do that so we can engage participants as partners. The days of sending a newsletter every 6 months to a year to your participants about your study and your study findings, I think are now long gone. We can do that in a much more efficient way than we've done in the past. And the one I want to really have you think about, which is the PMI as a test bed for using digital technology for validation and evaluation. There'll be over 1 million people in this study. And if the data is correct, there'll be over 700,000 of them with smartphones and climbing every day. So the number of people with which we can actually just go in, select a subgroup of people with a particular condition and a particular phone doing a particular thing, and test early and quickly some validation work or initial evaluation of a new component of an intervention, those sort of things, I think we'll be able to do much more rapidly with this kind of platform. So it puts together patient partnerships, electronic health records, technologies, genomics, and data science. And I'm going to stop there because I've taken longer than I wanted to take and give you guys a chance to ask questions. So thank you.